Where else will I?
Okay, let me
Oh,
share
it's just an
screen.
hour and a half.
Well, every people.
Wednesday.
So
Just for
Tammy, I
8
got it.
weeks or 10 weeks. Yeah, a few more.
Let me do share screen for the work. Come on, there we go. And there we go. Okay, so from last time, we were continuing on looking at Ezekiel chapter 38 and seeing what the Lord has planned to come together. And again, most of the events of chapter 37 and chapter 38 and chapter 39 of Ezekiel have to do with the nation of Israel. And so it starts in chapter 37 with the reuniting of Israel as a nation, and it talks about, it places these events in what it calls the last days of the far future, in language that
If
the
you want to
Jews
go
would have
watch in my
thought
room, you're more than welcome.
was
Yeah,
the
I
the
can
end
show
of
you how to
times,
turn
that
it
kind
on
of
real
thing.
quick if you want to go in there.
And
Would you like to go in there?
Yeah.
Okay.
all right. So anyway, so hold on just a second. Okay, can you hear me? Get something wrong here. Okay.
Yes.
Okay, anyway, so we looked at those alliances that are forming, because it does talk in Ezekiel chapter 38 about these alliances that come together. And you'll notice as we go on that there's a lot of metaphors used for those alliances, like beasts and horns and all that kind of stuff. We're going to try and do a little bit of work with that, although nobody has ever been able to fully understand what that is. Some aspects of prophecy we're just not going to know until we can look back on it and go, oh, that was the beast, that was the horns. We'll see it more then. We can try and interpret, and we will try and do our best to interpret a little bit. But all of these alliances start forming between Turkey, kind of as one of the main players, and Persia, or what is today Iran, as one of the main players, and then these little nations that are joining together in all of these these alliances against Israel. And eventually one of them will come against Israel in a military way. And we're not exactly sure which one, but the way it's described, it's very clear that something is going to happen militarily against the peace that Israel, kind of has now, and in line with what God has clearly said. Okay. And then we also noticed that some nations are not going to join in, and which is odd. For instance, Saudi Arabia has always been at odds with Israel since its inception, and even before. Saudi Arabia fought against Israel becoming a nation in the 40s. So did Jordan. They fought against it. And yet now, all of a sudden, they are forming alliances that are brand new, never in history, especially given that Saudi Arabia is a Muslim nation and Israel is infringing on the Muslim nation that was Palestine. And they're all of a sudden taking over land. This is the whole conflict in the Middle East, is that it was called Palestine for thousands of years, and then Israel says, nope, it was our land, we're taking it back. And the forces like the US and Britain backed that and said, yep, you're okay, go on back to your homeland. So clearly we are the great Satan for starting this, and Israel is the little Satan for being the ones who took the land. But that's the nature of the conflict, which is continued on. And yet some of these nations, who are neighbors, bordering neighbors. Jordan is a bordering neighbor. The smaller Arab nations are not. They're down south. But according to Scripture, they will not stand against Israel. They will. Well, it's hard to tell. I don't think they'll stand against Israel. The language seems to indicate that they will stand off and not take part and just, be a sort of a commentator, or that they will possibly help Israel. But the language is so unclear that we're just not 100% sure. It just seems to indicate that they will not join all of those nations against Israel, right? And then we talked about the birth pains beginning, and that was everything from earthquakes and wars to what we talked about last time, which was a falling away in the church, a sort of great departure. And that probably means a departure both from Christ, walking away from your faith, but also maybe a departure from holiness, or a departure from good doctrine. Could really be anything. But it was this falling away was a big chunk of these birth pains that we're talking about. And then the last thing on here, we're gonna see, and these were those events that are in sort of in gold in your book. We're gonna see the Antichrist start to take stage. Okay, so one of these was one of the I think we started with, looking at my book here, we probably started with last week with event number 3, which was the beginning of the birth pains. Event number 4, the rise of Antichrist. And we got through event number 5, which is the 4 horsemen. And if you happen to read Revelation, you'll see what they are. The first horseman is the Antichrist, and then the others are war and famine and inflation and disease and plague and all kinds of stuff. They begin to take the stage. Now, the horsemen are really hard to nail down because they could span the whole of decades, or they could be just a severe worsening of what they represent. Meaning, for instance, if one horse represents war, then the horseman coming may be worse war, far worse war, or it could just mean that it's war and it surrounds the time of the coming of Christ. Right? So they're going to begin to take stage, and they're going to begin to prepare themselves for entrance. So again, arguable. There are a lot of different opinions on when they take stage, what they represent. It's clear in a general sense what they represent when you read them, but do they represent a specific move against Israel or against the Middle East? We don't know that part. It's vague. So we're going to start tonight, and we are on page 50 with what I consider probably the key event. The key event. You can notice I'm emphasizing this, and that is that the Israelis need to build a new third temple. And I'm going to show you why that is, okay? But it needs to be built, in my opinion. Again, there's always differences of what that means, right? But it definitely, in my opinion, definitely needs to happen in a clear reading of Scripture. So let me tell you a little bit about the former temples, okay? So the first temple, we're talking about in the 6th century BC. No, the first temple, I'm sorry, the first temple would be about the 10th century BC. In fact, there's a date down there. 957, completed in 957 BC. All right. So it's considered to be Solomon's temple because Solomon is the one who put lavish amounts of money into this temple. So you can read all about that in the Old Testament, in the life of Solomon, in the Kings and Chronicles. I believe both of those discuss the building of Solomon's temple. So that was the first temple, right? Built under King Solomon's reign and completed in 957. There it is. But it was looted and destroyed less than 400 years later. It looks like about 370 years later, thereabouts. And so if you remember your church history, that the Babylonians came in and they took over, the land of Jerusalem. They took all the people out, mainly the good people, the smart and strong people, took them out, brought them to Babylon, left the poor and the sickly and that type of thing, and then demolished, looted the temple, which is, lots of gold, lots of valuable metals, and then destroyed it. So when King Nebuchadnezzar did that, that temple was gone. It was erased from planet Earth, probably down to zero, right? And basically the implements of the temple, you'll see in the picture right here. See these bowls? These are cleansing bowls right here. Here's a giant bowl. And if you read through the Old Testament, you'll find that these were gold. These are gold bowls. So there's a whole lot of money right there. And these right here, these pillars are made of solid bronze, which is tool making equipment and weapon making equipment. And there is just gold and bronze and copper and silver everywhere throughout this temple. It was Solomon. Solomon was lavish. He liked to spend money, right? So that's the first temple. Here's the second temple. It's called Herod's temple, but it was not initially built by Herod. So it can be a little confusing to understand. So that's kind of a drawing of Herod's temple right there. Notice, let me go back to the drawings. Slightly different build of the temple area. I mean, these are speculative based on ancient documents, but one of the big things about the temple is he had these solid bronze columns, which were not really repeated in Herod's temple. They were just sort of stone columns right here. And there was some extra courts added. So Herod really put a lot of money into this temple. It was initially built about 70 years after the first temple was destroyed. So in the 516 range, and then it was destroyed also in about the year 70 AD or CE, however you want to say it. So it ended up being almost 600-year-old building by the time it was done. So it lasted until between 516 and about 40 or 50 BC, when Herod became king, and Herod just put a ton of money into rebuilding this. He wanted to be another Solomon. So he rebuilt the whole thing, and he did it so lavishly, and he built it with these courts around it and these colonnades and another extra court here, and then a bigger court, which is not in this picture, around the outside. He built all this stuff and added to the temple. And so its name changed to Herod's temple, right? But it began when Zerubbabel decided to be gracious to the Jews, let them go back. And that's the story of the book of Ezra, the book of Nehemiah, and then some of the later prophet books about the rebuilding of this temple in about 516 or so BC. And then, of course, later Herod fixes it, but Herod's repair only lasts about 100 years because it's gone by 70 AD. All right. So that's the second temple. And yes, I said that part. Okay. So some key things about the temple. All right. Some of these are filled in, some are not. But one key thing to remember as we move forward, right, is that the Jews will not sacrifice animals anywhere except at the temple. In fact, it's forbidden. Excuse me. So if we're talking about the Jews needing to rebuild a temple, we have to keep in mind that they can't sacrifice except at the temple, right? It's forbidden. So there may be some minor exceptions. We even saw one a few years ago where they sacrificed an animal in a different location and then brought it to the temple and burnt it at the temple, but they can't formulate any regular sacrifices unless they have a temple. So the Jews are kind of, drumming their fingers and waiting impatiently for the creation of a new temple because they can't continue the Jewish tradition without it. And, we're coming up on, I think we just hit 75 years they've been a nation, and they're just sitting there waiting for the temple to be built, right? So they won't sacrifice. They will not build a temple anywhere except the location of the former temples. And I'll go into some locations. You'll see some pictures and stuff. So in other words, they're not going to just go, oh, well, we can't build there. We're going to build somewhere else. They can't. It has to be that location, right? So therefore, in order for the Antichrist to stop sacrifices, which Scripture says he does, that's what he does. He enters the temple and stops sacrifices. In order for that to happen, there has to be a temple in Jerusalem on the Temple Mount. There's no option. Scripture is very clear about what Antichrist does. And if he's going to do it, and he's going to do it in the temple can only be in one place. And so we can infer from that the Jews will most likely build a new temple, okay, a third temple. And this is not a foreign thought, because they've been planning to do this for a very long time. They've been wanting to do this, right? So just a speculation, but it's possible that what Antichrist does, remember, Antichrist starts a peace agreement. What he does may be to create the peace agreement in order to allow the Jews to build a temple. That's very possible, right? We don't know that. It's possible that the Jews build a temple and then there's an agreement. We don't know. But it is very plausible, given the problems with building a temple, that that's the agreement that he might make. So let me show you some photos and get you sort of oriented here. Some of these are not in your workbook, but I just want to get your mindset right. This is a modern drawing of the state of Israel, right? And so you'll see the Dead Sea here. Jerusalem is kind of inland. It's the capital, right? It's sort of inland of the from the Mediterranean Ocean. There's Egypt, which borders right there on the south. This is Gaza, known as the Gaza Strip. This is current day. That's known as the West Bank. These are the areas that are in dispute, right? And then bordered on the north is Lebanon, Syria, and then Jordan borders the east down there. And then down here, what you can't see is where Saudi Arabia is. Here's a little bit tighter drawing. This is sort of a hybrid photograph / drawing of what would have made up the ancient city of Jerusalem back in the old days. So here's the Temple Mount, sort of right here in the center. Current photograph. This would be probably the Mount of Olives in this range over here, and then the old city would have been like this, sort of outlined with a wall. But now the city is incredibly large. It goes all around the old city. But this little area is the bone of contention for unbelievable amounts of people. Here's another picture. This is another hybrid drawing / overhead photo of what is now the current Temple Mount. Okay. So there's the Dome of the Rock. I'm going to show you what all these places are in there. This is the wall that currently surrounds it. Some of this was old. Some of it was added by Herod, right? You'll notice there is a smaller wall or a smaller elevated area in the middle, which is not exactly rectangular. It's got a sort of an odd shape to it. And then you'll notice the big wall that surrounds it today. All right. Having never been to Jerusalem, I'm gonna fill you in on everything I can possibly fill you in on with regard to the nation and the city of Jerusalem. Another one, this one's kind of looking northwest. Here is again that outside wall, a lot of which was built by Herod, added to by Herod. Dome of the Rock, some other stuff, right? The question then is, okay, if we're talking about wanting to build a temple, the question is, who is it that controls the Temple Mount now, right? That's what we're going to look at. So there again is a Temple Mount in drawing form, right? Dome of the Rock right here, that golden domed place. The Western Wall, which you've all heard about, is sort of this area, little tiny area of the wall, the ancient wall. Basically, what they might contend is the only part left of the wall is here, and the rest of it has kind of been rebuilt, right? But of the ancient wall, that's it, right? You'll see the mosque down here. And then you'll see that, I don't know if you know this, but Jerusalem, this would be a representative of the old border of Jerusalem. It's divided into quarters, and they call each one the quarter. There's a Christian quarter, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, which is the place where Jesus would have been buried, is in the Christian quarter. There's an Armenian quarter, which is very odd. The Armenian are a people group from up north, and yet they are Christian and have been since about the year 300. First Christian nation in the world. And they have their own quarter. And then there's the Jewish quarter, which possesses that Western Wall, and the Muslim quarter right up here. Right? And then there's sort of some other drawings here and stuff. Here comes my lovely wife. You want to peek in there?
Hi, everyone.
She's getting ready for bed because she has to wake up at dark 30 every day.
So it looks like the Muslim quarter is bigger than the rest of them.
Yes, it absolutely is. Well, keep in mind that the Muslims controlled this for thousands of years, the whole area. So the quarters were a concession from the Muslims to the rest of the world. They were agreed upon by multiple councils with the input of the UN and some other groups for about the last 100 years. So before this concession, it was all Muslim. And then they conceded, especially when tourism kind of kicked in. And, a lot of it had to do with the Crusades. But, if you remember, the Christians sort of lost the Crusades, and the land became Muslim for years after all that. So even though, there were Christians who continued to live here while the Muslims were here, this quarter thing was really not an official thing until the concessions were made in the last century or so. So yeah, this is Old City Jerusalem. You're seeing down here kind of where Jerusalem is now, and all this This is how big Jerusalem has gotten now. So
So in the, I'm sorry, Dave,
That's okay.
in those borders, is there infighting between, are fighting between those? I mean, are there boundaries? Are they just streets or what?
no, yeah, no, there really are just streets. There's no, as far as I know, there aren't any solid boundaries. Keep in mind, it's really dense. It's a really dense place. So, it's not like a city we'd know of now where there's a big building and then a big open space around it. It is really packed in Jerusalem. So as far as I know, there are no official borders, and there really is not that much infighting among these. There's definitely not among the Christian and Armenian. The Jewish doesn't really fight with anybody. The only time there's violence, really the only time there's major violence, is when there are protests on the part of the Muslims or Jews in this area, specifically with regard to this Western Wall area. And actually, let me rephrase that, and the Temple Mount. And that's kind of what we're going to learn in the next few minutes,
So
why the Temple Mount is so contentious. But there are some minor scuffles. Yeah.
Why do they care? Why do the Muslims care about the Western Wall?
Because the Muslims control the entire Temple Mount, and the Western Wall is part of the Temple Mount. And Muslims hate Jews. So they don't want Jews worshiping. When the Jews go to the Western Wall, it's also known, remember, as the Wailing Wall. When they go there, their whole point is to wail to God that they would gain control of the temple again and be able to build the Temple Mount, and be able to build their temple on the Mount. So the Muslims are saying, why are you, first off, they don't like anybody praying. If you're a Christian, you can't go on and pray on the Temple Mount. You can't do anything that even looks like prayer. You can't sing. You're not even really allowed to talk. The Muslims are extremely guarded about what goes on the Temple Mount, right? But right outside the wall of that is all these Jews assembling to pray that the Muslims get overthrown. So there have been a lot of encounters right around the area of this Western Wall. Keep in mind that the Western Wall is, this part in green right here is probably about 75 feet below the plateau of this temple wall right here. So you have to go up quite a bit to get to the Temple Mount. So sometimes there will be people who will gather here and throw things down onto the Jews down here. It's extremely guarded, very heavily guarded, because they just don't want that, So yeah, there are areas of conflict. There have been a lot of minor scuffles and a few major scuffles. And as we said last time, the Jews sort of know that there's a war coming, and over this land, because the Jews believe it's theirs and the Muslims believe it's theirs. So as we go forward, maybe even today, I'll explain a little bit more of the history and you might understand it better. So, okay. So the answer to the question, who controls the Temple Mount? Right now it's Jordan. Okay. Specifically something called the Waqf. I don't know how to pronounce that. Waqf Council. Let me see where we are in your book, 51. Yeah. Okay. So Waqf Council is a Jordanian, and largely because they were neutral during a lot of these wars, it's a Jordanian council that controls what goes on the Temple Mount. But also keep in mind the Jordanian or Jordan is Muslim. So the Waqf Council is a Muslim-controlled council that deals with the goings-on in the Temple Mount, right? So in 1967, there was the 6 Days War. At that point, Israel was able to take control of the Temple Mount, right? But immediately was handed over to Jordan because there's too much contention between the Palestinian Muslims who were there and the Jews who were trying to move in there. So that war was a very short, obviously, a 6 days war. The Jews won decisively and very quickly, but they handed control back over, and they've done this multiple times, back over to the Muslims. That's a bone of contention among Jews, is that the Israeli government's continuing to hand over the Temple Mount is bothersome to a number of the Jews, specifically really fundamentalist Jews. But politics are politics, and they have reasons, you know. So Jordan controls it, right? So any attempt by the Jews to take control of the Temple Mount has failed for decades, except for the 6 Days War and another minor skirmish in the 70s, where again it was handed over to the Jordan, Jordanian Council, right? 1973 it was won, but again, this is the one I was just talking about. Immediately returned to Palestinian Arab control by Jordan. Okay, a quick story that always raises the cockles on my arms when I tell it. I was watching television in the 90s, long time ago, and I've been studying prophecy for ages, But I was watching television and I caught a news story about some skirmishes at the Temple Mount. And what had happened was, like I had said, let me go back. There we go. Like I had said, Muslims were standing above the Western Wall on the Temple Mount, and they were throwing rocks down onto Jews who were assembled down here. I think it was during Ramadan. So it's during the Muslim holy days. But the Jews are here, they're insulted. The Muslims are insulted by the Jews praying. So the Muslims start throwing rocks down. And of course, something, a skirmish erupts, and it gets pretty bad. They've had quite a few of those. And the military is called in, and it takes a few days to get the fighting to calm down. A lot of people died. This is in the mid to late 90s. But I remember something that just chilled me to the bone. It was an interview, a television interview with one of the guards, one of the IDF guards, which is the Israeli Defense Force. One of the guards, and he wasn't actually a guard, might be a bad name. He was a fairly high-ranking man in the IDF. And they said, "What do you think is the solution?" And his response was, if we're never going to have peace here, if anybody could ever bring peace here, that person would be worshipped as a god. Because he's being emphatic, saying we can't get peace here.
Wow.
But his statement that anybody who could bring peace would be worshipped as a god was chilling, because that is literally exactly what's going to happen. Somebody's going to bring peace, and that person's going to get worship for it. And it's ready. The Jews are ready now. They want the Temple Mount. They've been waiting for years, decades for it. And there's constant skirmishes, but it just it hasn't happened yet. All right. So in other words, what I'm getting at with this is the chance of the Muslims handing over the Temple Mount is very, very slim. They're not going to just hand it over. Okay. But which means that the Jews can't build a temple there on the Temple Mount because the Muslims control it, and they're not going to allow that. It's not going to happen. So the question then is, what could make it happen? So here's a couple of, I think we're on the next page now. Yeah, 52. What could make it happen? Couple speculations. Number one, Israel is normalizing relations with Jordan and Saudi Arabia, just like we were talking about earlier. This normalization of relations, which is brand new, is a huge advancement in peace talks between allying Jordan with Saudi Arabia and allying both of those with the Jews. All right, historic. So the Abrahamic Accords, which were offered by the Trump administration and agreed upon by Pompeo, who was the Secretary of State at the time. These were absolutely historic, never before seen accords between Saudi Arabia, Jordan, and Israel. And since Jordan controls the Temple Mount, and Saudi Arabia basically is the father of the Palestinian peoples, because they are Arab people, the Palestinians are Arabs, right? Then there is the possibility of a door opening to the Jews for the first time in thousands of years. So that's one point. Like I said that. Yeah, of course. Makes sense biblically, peace between these two factions could allow the building of a third temple, just like scripture predicts. Okay. So here's a recent headline, kind of show you what we're talking about. Saudi shocker, the temple is Jewish. Saudis said the temple is Jewish. The Temple Mount, excuse me, is Jewish. Right? And that Muslims, according to the Saudis, should not be praying on the Temple Mount. They should get off the Temple Mount and pray toward Mecca, which is to the south of the Temple Mount. So the Saudis are taking a stand saying, you don't own the Temple Mount. The Jews clearly do. And you shouldn't be praying there anyway. Right? Another one, this is from just year and a half ago or so. Right? And this is a Jewish newspaper. Headline saying, when blood spills on Passover and Easter, it's time to build the temple. All right. And this is exactly what's been happening. Passover and Easter, there's always issues. The Jews are celebrating Passover. The Christians are celebrating Easter, all of it occurring in Jerusalem. And the Muslims are ticked off and they attack. And there's blood spilled pretty much every time. But the Jews are now saying it's time to rebuild the temple. Right. And then number 2, which is kind of a big one, and that's that the temple is ready to be built. So Jews have been working for decades preparing for the coming of a third temple. They're not just sitting there waiting for it to happen and then they'll start. They've been planning for decades for this. Let me show you some facts about that. Here's another headline, by the way. Build the third temple, right? By the Times of Israel. Israel calling for rebuilding their temple, returning animal sacrifices. Jews begin building third temple on Israel's Independence Day. This is a hard one. When they say begin building third temple, they're not actually on the Temple Mount. I'll show you what they're doing and it'll make more sense, right? Small group gathered in the old city of Jerusalem. This is from this article. And began chipping away at stones, preparing them to be used to build the prophesied third temple. So they're in the old city right around the outside. And I wish I had pictures, but you can find pictures of the stones that were thrown down that are still lying there. They're still lying just right outside that Temple Mount wall. They're just sitting there and they're from the old Temple Mount. So the Jews are saying, well, let's go get those and we'll start forming and we can make stones out of them again. And we can build a temple. That's what's going on. All right. Likud, this is, by the way, it's from this month. This month, when it was June. So when I started this month, Likud, MK presents, what's MK mean? I forgot. Anyway, presents plan to divide the Temple Mount between the Jews and Muslims. Here's what they want to do. Let me go. This is another first in history, but Likud is one of the parties. There's a conservative party and the Likud party is the sort of more liberal of the parties in Jerusalem. Let me go back to a drawing and find out where I am. Okay. Go back to another drawing of Israel. Here's what the Likud is offering. All right. This right here is Muslim controlled, and this is all part of a new addition anyway that Herod did. This right here would be about where the Western Wall is, right? Sort of down below there, right? Here's what the Likud president says. He says, everything from this point where my mouse is, north, so halfway, north should go to the Jews, and everything from this point south should go to the Muslims. In other words, he wants to divide the Temple Mount in half and have Jews control part of it and Muslims control part of it. The problem is, let me go back. The Muslims are not going to accept that because this is the Dome of the Rock. This is a very important Muslim location right here, one of their top 5 holy places in the world. So the Jews want to say, well, you guys can have this mosque, we'll take this. And of course, what are the Jews going to do? They're probably going to tear this down, so there will be more. So this will all come to light. Okay. So when I say the temple is ready, here's what I mean. The temple implements are ready. Okay. The implements are the objects that are needed in order to properly use the temple. So implements are things like menorahs, candelabras, tables. They have
Red heifer,
what?
the red heifer.
Yeah, well, yeah, we're going to get to that. That's a big one. But the implements are the physical tools that you would use in the temple, right? Those are actually ready, right? The temple vessels are ready for rebuilding. I'll show you some pictures if I can find them. There we go. This is an ancient style loom that's being reused to make the garments that the priests would wear. They're making garments now for priests, right? They're ready. Here, this is actually a picture of probably what was the Ark of the Covenant. I don't think they're going to rebuild the Ark of the Covenant, but they've built these as decoration for what they believe would go on top of the Ark of the Covenant. These are out of the Old Testament descriptions of the two angels and their wings touching, and this is another artistic rendition. We don't know what the old Ark of the Covenant looked like, but we're reading the Old Testament, and this is about what it looked like. The actual Ark is just a box covered in gold, right? And everything else is a decoration, but they've built the decorations for it, right? So they're getting things ready. I don't have a lot of pictures because you can't find them. But there's an organization known as the Temple Institute. It's a Jewish organization. And if you go there to Jerusalem, you can visit the Temple Institute building and you can see some of the things they have, like the menorah, etc., that are just ready to go into a temple right now. Okay. So that's the temple implements. Second one, the priesthood is ready, right? They're not waiting to find priests. They know who the priests are going to be. They're ready now, right? Priests are in training. This is from August of 2016. So this is 7 years ago. Priests are in training for the coming of the third temple. Another one. When the Temple Mount is ready, these temple priests will be ready to serve. This is 2020. And here's a picture of them. These guys are temple priests. They're wearing the temple outfits. Another one, Israel's priests prepare for the third temple. This is about 2020 as well. Okay. So the priesthood is ready. The priests are ready to go. The cornerstone is ready. Now the cornerstone was the first block they would put in. And it was not only was it, significant, religious way, but it's also the cornerstone from an architectural way is a square stone that they use to square off the whole building. They measure off the cornerstone. So they get one stone. I'm going to show it to you. All right. This is not the temple, but this is a cornerstone right here. And it's made very, very precisely to be exactly square. And then they use this to reference squareness on the outside walls in the old days. Now we have better ways to do that now, but it's still symbolic and it's still part of the plan to rebuild. So the cornerstone is ready. So the cornerstone for the third temple, prepared by the Faithful Movement, which is a name of a Jewish movement, is ready to start the process of building the Holy Temple. It's ready. It was carried to the Holy Temple Mount in Jerusalem and will be carried again. They've actually carried the cornerstone up there symbolically or physically, but as a ceremony, and then taken it out because the Muslims won't stand for it. So they protect it very carefully, But the cornerstone is ready, right? Financing is underway. Meaning they've got tons of money that they are crowdfunding to build the temple. It's going to be an expensive build. It's going to be a multiple millions of dollars, in the tens of millions of dollars, I would imagine, thereabout, especially when you're given gold and how ornate they make it. You can go online, you can find blueprint ideas for what it might look like. It might be modern looking, or they might go with the old symbolic look, right? And this is what Nancy mentioned, the red heifer is almost ready. This is out of Numbers chapter 19. So I want you to understand why the red heifer is a thing. I'm going to read just little parts of it. Look at verse 2. This is the Lord speaking. This is a requirement of the law that the Lord has commanded. Tell the Israelites to bring you a red heifer without defect or blemish, and that has never been under yoke. What that means is there can't be any foreign colored hairs. There can't be there can't be a black hair on this red heifer or a white hair. It has to be entirely red, no blemishes, meaning no open sores or anything like that. The most perfect red heifer they can possibly find, right? Then you got to give it to the priest. Then verse 4, Eleazar the priest, this is for the building of the temple that Eleazar was priest of. Eleazar is to take some of the blood in his finger and sprinkle it 7 times in front of the tent of the meeting. And then the heifer is to be burned, the whole heifer. It's not cut apart. The whole heifer is burned. And then a little bit more, starting at verse 8. And then this talks about the man who burns it must wash his hands and bathe in water. And then verse 9, a man who is clean gathers up the ashes of the heifer, puts them in a ceremonially clean place outside the camp. And then those are to be kept by the Israelite community for use in the water of cleansing. So it's my understanding that they mix the ashes with water in order to cleanse, strictly because it was God said to do it. Okay. So that's out of Numbers, sort of describing what's going on now. In 2015, the Temple Institute that I mentioned began searching for a red heifer. So the Jews are not kidding around. They're ready to build this thing, right? The project involved breeding cattle in order to create a perfect specimen of a red heifer, right? By the way, this is the version of chapter 19, but in 2018, at the bottom in pink, the Temple Institute announced its first candidate. So here's what happened. They were bred and birthed in Texas and not over there, probably to keep them safe from Muslims trying to kill everything, right? But so in September 2022, which is, almost a year ago, 5 red heifers were candidates for red heifer. They've been watched and viewed over there. You'll see this is a video clip from the screen capture, but they looked over these red heifers in Texas. They found 5 and they shipped them from Texas. This should say to Israel. They shipped them from Texas to Israel. All of them believed to be perfect specimens. So they have these 5 candidates now, right? The same month, another candidate was discovered in Colombia, and it was also shipped out. So now they have 6. Okay. So the Orthodox Jews are saying that this miracle of perfect red heifers sparks talks of rebuilding the temple. So again, it's from November. They're ready. Okay. By the way, since the forming of this class, it's been certified. And the next step then is the sacrifice of the red heifer, which they're probably going to partake pretty soon. They'll keep the ashes. They'll save the ashes for the ceremony to start a temple. So we are not far away from a temple being built. Okay.
So Dave,
Yeah.
that heifer doesn't have to be sacrificed in the temple?
No, they can't. No, because it's required to build the temple. So it can't be sacrificed in the temple. That's why God's provision in the Old Testament was to sacrifice it outside the camp. So go somewhere outside, largely because Jews weren't really supposed to be around dead bodies. Only the certain priests were allowed to do that. What's that?
So they sacrifice the heifer first,
Mhm.
and then they use the ashes to purify the water that they purify themselves to build the temple.
Yeah, it's entirely ceremonial.
Okay.
But the Jews believe it's still to be done because they don't see anything in Numbers that says don't do this again. As far as they're concerned, we have to do this every time we build a temple.
So
Part of their laws.
Yeah, it is. It is. Yeah.
So Christ has nothing to do with that, right? I mean, his sacrifice for us. I know they don't believe Jesus is the Messiah,
Right.
but for the Jews who do believe Jesus is the Messiah, they would still do this ceremonial heifer thing?
No, I'm talking about Jews who are not Messianic, who are not Christian.
So
No.
do the Messianic Jews still think building the temple is important? I mean, I would think they would.
Only
right?
in a prophetic sense. That's it.
Okay.
In fact, if you think about it, if you think about it, the temple is actually kind of an affront to God. So God doesn't want a temple to be built. He just knows it's going to be built, right? Because the temple is for sacrifice, but sacrifice has already been given. So building of a temple becomes completely redundant. There's no reason for it. So it's only to Jews. And in fact, if you think about it, I can imagine God up in heaven going, what are you guys doing? You don't need a temple. I already did this. In fact, if you build a temple, it's kind of an insult because you're telling me what I did for you is not enough. I mean, I don't want to speak for God, but I could see him saying something like that. So the building of the temple is not something that Christians even should look forward to, except for the fact that it signals the prophetic events of the end times. That's it. That's the only
But it
reason we'd
serves
like
a
it.
very big purpose for Satan.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, and of course, exactly right. Of course, Satan is going to use the temple too. He's going to declare himself God in the temple. Okay. So yeah, hopefully that answers your question.
So God won't be in that temple.
No.
Okay.
God's
Okay.
not involved in that anymore. The temple now is our Holy Spirit.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Oops, sorry. Okay. There's a video. I can't play it for you, so I'm gonna let you write the title down. And the reason I can't play it is because I'll get the video get marked. So I won't be able to post this video on the internet if I play someone else's video. So I got marked for that one time before, and it's not fun. So, but you can look it up. In fact, there are multiples of these now, because every late July, early August, they celebrate something called Tish B'Av, which Tish B'Av means the ninth of Aviv, the ninth of the month of Aviv, which is when historically the old temple was torn down. So on the 9th of Aviv, which usually occurs in around late July, early August, they celebrate and they make these videos about how the children are ready. And this one is really neat. If you can find this one, watch it because it's really neat. It's basically the children saying, we're ready to build right now. And going to the adults and saying, what are you guys doing? We want to build right now. So it's very touching. So look that up if you can. All right. So here's where it gets difficult, and that's regarding the location of the temple that's coming. Okay. So as you can see, we're spending a lot of time on this because it's that important. The location of the coming temple is vital. Okay. It's generally accepted that the previous temples were built on the location of the Dome of the Rock, right? Where the Dome of the Rock is now, that's where the temples have been, according to tradition. I'm going to challenge that tradition. And I'm not alone in doing this. It's not really me. It's several people. Okay. But the Jews seem to believe that the Dome of the Rock is the location of the old temple. And they might be right. Right. I'm going to propose another theory that I think is also strong, but they might be right. It's very possible. Okay. Some archaeological studies have found evidence of walls and chambers that may have been part of the first or second temple. So underneath the Temple Mount, there is a lot of architecture. It's not just rubble and dirt. There's architecture, and there are walls, and there are former buildings and compartments underneath the Temple Mount. Again, very hard to find pictures of, but they are under there. Okay. So as we learn, the temple must be built on the Temple Mount. Okay. But the Muslims control the Temple Mount, and the Dome of the Rock is right there, right in the middle of the Temple Mount. That's the problem. Okay. Issues regarding it is the fourth most holy place in Islam. So the first is Mecca. The second is Medina. Those are both in Saudi Arabia. And remember these names because we're going to go into these more. Al-Aqsa Mosque, which is on the Temple Mount. And fourth is the Dome of the Rock, which is this, right? So the rock, where you get the name Dome of the Rock, is the very top of Mount Moriah. And that is the spot where Abraham brought Isaac as a sacrifice. That's the belief. And it's probably right. Okay. So when they say Dome of the Rock, they're talking about the place where Abraham brought Isaac to sacrifice him, right? It's also the place where Muslims believe that Muhammad climbed up to there and then ascended to heaven. They believe that, right? So because of that, it's very holy to the Muslims, right? And that becomes the central problem, right? That's the problem. So at the center of the current Temple Mount is an inner mount, and that's this, called the Muslim Mount. It's not a good name for it, but that's what it's called currently. So this is the Temple Mount, this big rectangle. This sort of weird rectangle is the Muslim Mount. All right. At the center of the Muslim Mount, there's the Dome of the Rock right at the center, and almost the center of the whole thing. Right. This should say fourth, fourth most holy Muslim site. And then on the southern end, this is wrong. I got these backwards. The southern end, oops, is the Al-Aqsa Mosque right here. That's more holy. This is the third most holy place. This is the fourth most holy place. All right. So there's your picture for you. And if you want, on that page, you have that big black and white drawing. You can fill those in if it helps you. Right. So this sort of in green, this Muslim Mount right there. And then sort of circled in that red is the Dome of the Rock. And that again should say fourth most holy. And this should say the third most holy. So yeah, and the circled in gold down here is Al-Aqsa Mosque. So this is more holy than this, which is why the Israeli government could say, well, we'll take this part then, because it's not that holy to you. This is what's holy to you. And we'll take this, and you can take everything south of that. But I don't think that's going to pass, but that's the attempt, right? So if you want, you can sort of draw those in. This is the Muslim Mount, Dome of the Rock kind of in the center, and the Al-Aqsa Mosque. Okay. I'll give you a second if you want to draw stuff in there. I just want you to be oriented visually with what it looks like. And notice the northern orientation as well. Yeah, David, what's up?
Could you possibly go back to page 52? I didn't quite catch the last two things. It was going kind of quick.
This
Yeah,
part?
that.
Yeah.
Yes.
Go for it. I'll give you a second. I'm going to eat some nuts because I didn't get a chance to eat dinner. Sorry if that's loud. Okay,
Thank you.
no problem. I'm finished eating. All right. So let's see where I ended up here. Okay, there we go. Also something also notable. I'm not sure if this is in your thing. It's not in your book, I don't think. Is that Muslims have a long history, and in fact a policy, of building their holy sites on top of the holy sites of any place they've conquered. So it is part of Muslim belief that when they conquer a place, especially a religiously significant place, if they tear down the old location, they will build on top of the old location. It's a conquering mentality. It's just something that Muslims do. Okay. For example, archaeological digs underneath the Al-Aqsa Mosque revealed what is most likely a Byzantine-era Christian church. So in other words, a very early Christian church. And that, again, is in this Al-Aqsa Mosque. So there are recent archaeological digs in this area. And what they believe is that this, because it was right next to the former temple, this was probably the location of a very early Christian church. So the Muslims won it, they tore it down, and they built on top of it. That's basically what they did. All right? So this is the problem that we're coming into, all right? Therefore, it is incredibly unlikely that the Muslims will ever willingly hand over control of the Temple Mount, let alone allow the destruction of it or construction on top of it. Some people have theorized, maybe a war will knock it over. Maybe there'll be an earthquake that can knock it over. If the Jews go in and try to knock the Dome of the Rock over, it's going to be a war. There's no doubt, right? So they can't build there without a war. If they manage to get that division of the Temple Mount through, they won't. But hypothetically, they might be able to do it then. But really, there's no way to build a temple here. Okay. However, I'm going to propose another answer. This to me is very interesting. Another theory, again, a little bit of the geography here. Okay. This is a very poor drawing, but This is looking from the south toward Mount Moriah. So you'll notice that the very top, which is where it was believed that Abraham sacrificed Isaac or was going to sacrifice Isaac, the very top of that mountain is where the temple is, right? And the old temple, they believe, was right on top of that. Okay. A little quick history. Where are we here? There we go. 2 Samuel is where you find this story, chapter 24. And it's the story of the origin of the temple's location. So David had sinned, if you remember, and his people were suffering, right? He wanted to build a temple, but God said no. But King David was instructed to set up an altar somewhere, and that altar would hopefully calm God down, give him a good attitude toward David, so David could build the temple. You know, like I said, eventually God said no, right? But this altar was what David wanted to accomplish, to try and do that, right? So David approached a man by the name of Aruna, I don't know how to pronounce that. And he purchased a threshing floor as a location for an altar. This is a threshing floor. This is not the one on Moriah. It's just what a threshing floor looked like. Okay. They were round, they were flat. Threshing is what they would do to the wheat, in case you don't know, or they would beat it and they would throw it up in the air and the wind would carry away all the light stuff, and then the grain would fall down because it was heavy, right? That's why, let me go back. That's why the top of a mountain was a perfect place for a threshing floor, because the wind would whip over and whip all the grain husk away, right? So David goes and buys this threshing floor. Again, yeah, known for being in locations that were flat and high, so as to more easily separate the grain and chaff, right? And the one that David bought was at the top of Mount Moriah. So that's how we got the first temple, right? It also happened to be, remember, he bought it from non-Hebrews, the Jebusites. So these were not people who put any credence into the stories of people like Abraham, right? So basically Abraham tried to, sacrifice Isaac, didn't do it, if you remember the story. But the Jebusite people who later took over the land just said, oh, we don't know what it is, but it's a great place for a threshing floor. So they put a threshing floor there. And then David is sent to go back and buy that threshing floor because of its significance, actually. Another picture. Yeah, there's another picture for you. So this is the area, the top of Mount Moriah, that David wants to build a temple, or the place where he puts the altar on when he tells God he wants to build it, right? And then that same site is later chosen by Solomon for the building of the first temple of God, okay? It's also the same site as Herod's temple. So it's always that site right there where the temple's going to be. Okay? And then this is from, yeah, you have this, actually, this is the verse you have in red at the very bottom. So Solomon goes to the same place to build the temple. This is just biblical proof for what I just said. He goes to Mount Moriah, where the Lord had appeared to his father David. It was on the threshing floor of Araunah, the Jebusite, the place provided by David. So David was not allowed to build the temple, but he put an altar on that spot, and then Solomon built the temple there. All right. We're on page 55 now. Okay. Some characteristics of a threshing floor. This is actually important for later. Usually it was about 8 to 10 feet, circular, 8 to 12 feet circular. This one in this picture, which is an ancient threshing floor in the Middle East, but it's not on the Temple Mount. But that's what they look like. And they couldn't be too big, because then you've got this, the grain and all the giant surface, and you can't really control it. So they were generally circular. They were to be as flat as possible. In fact, this is probably not even a good example, because even though it's flat, they would probably have wanted a place that was like no rocks and no spaces between, like maybe a perfectly flat area where they're not going to lose grain into these little areas down here, these little cracks, right? And then obviously a high altitude so that the wind would whip past it, All right. You following me so far? Okay. So in my belief now, I could be wrong. Why not the Dome of the Rock? All right. The Dome of the Rock, although presumed for millennia to be the location of the threshing floor, may not be the location. This is the rock inside the Dome of the Rock. That's a photo of it right there. Notice all these little indentations and holes and, just weird stuff they've got on there. But that's the rock inside the Dome of the Rock, okay? As you can see, it doesn't really fit the description of a threshing floor. It's not really flat. It's got holes everywhere, and it's way too big, okay? It's not flat. It's too big. It's about 50 feet in diameter, okay? Let me show you some pictures real quick. I want to see where you are. Here we are. Yeah, not flat and too big. Those are the main things to remember. See if I can get you some pictures. There's sort of a layout of what the temple might have looked like right there. This is First King from First Kings right here. Sorry, I'm looking for where you are. Okay, you do have a drawing of this, right? So it was it was a rectangular building. This is extremely simplified. Excuse me. Drawing of the temple, but it was 3 times as long as it was wide. So it's 30 feet wide and 90 feet long. Okay. It was described in cubits. So 60 cubits, which equals, it could have been 30 to 35 feet. Whatever the case, it was always twice as long as it was wide. So going by, an approximate 1.5 feet, which is about what a cubit is. Cubit, by the way, is the distance from your elbow to the tip of your fingers. That's a cubit. That's how they used to measure, right? So the temple was about 90 by 30, thereabouts. He partitioned 20 cubits, which actually is not, it kind of, I think about it, is not, I think it was 20 cubits. It might have been 30 cubits. I'm not sure. I'd have to look it up again. But there was, about a third of it was what's known as the holiest of holies. So this is the area where only the high priest one time a year could go in. The rest of the priests could go in this outer portion. It's inside a room, but it's not inside the holy. This was called the holy place, and this was called the holiest of holies right here. Okay. So it was about 30 by 30. Yeah, okay. It was 20 cubits, which is 30 foot. Yeah. So it's 30 by 30 feet right there. So there's the problem. Okay. There's another drawing on a different angle. There's the holiest of holies again. This is the size of the dome, right? The dome is, or the rock inside the Dome of the Rock. I'm sorry. It's about 50 foot. So it won't fit inside the inner sanctuary. There's going to be parts of it outside the sanctuary and parts of it inside this other portion of the temple. So here's one reason I think that the Dome of the Rock might not be the right location is because of things like this. It's way too big. Okay. I'm going to present another view to you in just a minute. Okay. A new theory. And then we're still on 56. Okay. So here's a new theory, right? On the Temple Mount, there's a gazebo with an odd round piece of rock inside of it, right? Approximately 10 feet in diameter. It's known as the Dome of Spirits, the Dome of the Spirits. So now we're looking south. We're standing on the Muslim Mount. We're looking south. There's the Dome of the Rock. If you could see it, you'd see the Muslim mosque. I think this actually might be one of the domes on the mosque right here. But this thing is odd. It's just sort of sitting there, right? So it's right up here in blue. It's right up there on the on this Muslim Mount, but it's called the Dome of Spirits. Okay. Show you a few more pictures. A little bit closer. But what you'll notice is, if you can, the floor is about 10 feet. Okay. And it's perfectly flat. This would be a perfect threshing floor right here. All right. It is not covered by these stones. It's the actual top of the mountain. These stones stop at this barrier right here. But this part right here is the actual top of Mount Moriah flattened out. So you follow what I'm getting at? I think this is the better candidate for the floor of that threshing floor that was purchased. It's the right size. It's perfectly flat. It doesn't have any indentations. It would fit inside the temple. Okay. That would be about what it would look like there. So if they wanted to build the temple on the place where Abraham was going to sacrifice Isaac, that dome of the spirits would fit perfectly right there. So that's part of my theory. I'm going to give you a couple more parts to it. Okay. It fits all of the threshing floor parameters we've discussed before, the size, the flatness, all that stuff. Top of the mountain, same thing. Okay. A little bit more evidence to be considered in this, right? So we're about in the middle of page 56, right? This is known as the Golden Gate right here. It was a gate. Notice it's covered up now, right? It's very interesting stuff, but it was the Golden Gate, the gate into the entrance of the temple area, right? Scripture and tradition indicate that the holiest of holies was located directly in line with a gate that went into the Temple Mount. Okay. The Eastern Gate, it's another name for this. So it was called the Golden Gate and the Easter Gate, both of them. The Eastern Gate or Golden Gate meets the criteria of being directly in line. Let me show you what I mean. Okay. There's the Golden Gate right there. Right there. We're oriented pretty much directly north-south right now. I even tilted the picture so we'd be directly oriented north-south. Okay. You can see from this aerial view that right there is the Dome of Spirits, right? The Dome of Spirits directly lines up with the Golden Gate. It's directly east-west in line with the Golden Gate, right? There's a line for you. Okay. You have a little picture in there too. So this, again, makes it a better candidate. If you read through scripture and history, especially guys like Josephus, you'll discover what they say about you would enter into the Golden Gate and you would walk straight forward and hit the temple, according to ancient scholars. A little bit more. There's another drawing of it for you. Eastern Gate right there, directly in line with the Dome of Spirits. Okay. Another one, this is a different direction. North is over here going this way. But again, the Golden Gate, straight line. This is a theory about where the temple might have been. You notice the inner part of the temple. There's the Dome of the Spirits right in the middle of the center of the temple, right there. This would be the temple in this drawing, not this whole thing. The temple's not very big. It's about the size of your house, probably. Okay, maybe bigger. It's 30 by, yeah, okay, so it's 30 by 90. Most houses are, let's see, my house is about 30 by 50. So it's probably two of my houses together, thereabouts. That doesn't matter to you because you don't know where my house is. But this is a drawing of what it kind of, they believe it sort of used to look like. And this might be the, it might be either the outer temple that was built by Herod, or it might be the outer perimeter of what was the old Temple Mount, or the old wall around the Temple Mount. Nobody's quite sure about that, but they do know there's architectural or archaeological, evidence of a wall that was here. So, but you'll notice again, Golden Gate, direct line in. Okay, another artist rendition, right? There's the Golden Gate, direct line in. This building is the temple. This is kind of a copy of Solomon's temple right there. But there was an outer court and an inner court and that kind of thing. So these are all theorized by a doctor named Christian Widener. And this is the book that I actually read, doing this research right here. It's called The Temple Revealed. So it's a very valid theory that that this is with the location of the temple. And again, the building of the temple is a huge development. If you see that being built, we're very close, right? And we might be very close to see it being built because they're ready right now. It just takes the elimination of the Dome of the Rock in the Jewish mind, or something that allows the Jews to access the Temple Mount. Anything like that. Okay. So nobody's sure when that's going to happen. It's definitely going to be a sign of the end times when you see it. All right. I think we're done with section 5, which was our section on the things that lead up to the final 70th week. So if the building of the temple occurs before the beginning of the final 70th week, then we'll still know that we're getting close, but we'll know also that some kind of warfare is going to occur, because, you know, even if they were handed the Temple Mount right now, and the Muslims said, yeah, go for it, we're fine with it, other surrounding Muslims are not going to stand for it. There's going to be a war if they try to build a temple, unless there's some huge development in peace treaties, or maybe it's the Antichrist who makes a peace treaty and he's so highly respected that the surrounding nations say, all right, we're not going to mess with this guy. Either he's powerful or he's convincing or whatever the case is. But the building of the temple is huge. Okay. So our next section then is going to be section 6. We're going to be talking about what happens during the 70th week. Okay. Let me see how we are. I'm going to do it. Let me start a little bit of this since we have about 15 minutes or so. Do you have any major questions right now? Anything you need me to clarify?
Yeah, I'm a little confused when the 70th week starts.
Well, we don't know. There is no. It starts when the Antichrist makes a covenant. That's the start of it. Yeah.
So he makes this covenant.
Mhm.
They build this temple. Then the desecration of abomination, whatever that is.
Yeah. Yes. Close.
That
He does that.
starts the countdown. What actually starts the countdown? The temple?
The 7 years. The 7 years is the beginning of the peace treaty.
Mhm.
But the better thing to look for is going to be the abomination event, which you were just talking about, which is right in the middle of the 7 years. So right at the middle, this Antichrist who approved a peace treaty, he's going to break his own peace treaty. He's going to enter into the temple and he's going to present himself as if he were God. And a lot of people are going to fall for it. A lot of people are going to believe it. Yeah.
I get that. That part's pretty standard. The part I'm confused about is, I guess I don't know what we're looking for to show when that 7 years starts.
The peace treaty
Yeah.
that the Antichrist does with Israel.
Right. Exactly.
So
Yeah.
the peace treaty starts the 7-year countdown.
Yes.
With the Antichrist.
Right. Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. So whenever that peace treaty is signed, the reason I point to the middle is because, number one, we could miss the peace treaty. I think if we're watching, we probably won't. We could have a lot of false peace treaty talks. It's possible that we could miss the beginning of the 7 years, but we definitely will not miss the middle of the 7 years.
That's where he breaks the peace treaty.
Oh yeah, that's where everything gets broken. He enters the temple, and then according to what we studied in the Olivet Discourse in Matthew 24, that's the beginning of the Great Tribulation. So when he does that, it hits the fan and things get really, really bad worldwide from that point forward. So you're not going to miss that one. You could miss the 7-year treaty starting. Who knows? Maybe somebody comes in, there's a false start, or it just is kept quiet, and we just miss it because we were not following the news. But we will not miss the middle of the 7 years.
So this peace treaty is with Israel and somebody else.
Yeah, it's between. Yes, we don't know who.
Okay.
We don't know who, and calling it a peace treaty. I'm calling it a peace treaty because I think that's what it'll be. But Daniel 7 specifically, the wording is, he makes a covenant with the many for 7 years. That's all we know about the covenant. That's it. About the 7 years. He makes a 7-year The wording is he makes a 7-year covenant with the many. We're assuming the many means either many nations or it could be just the Jews, because the language is just too vague, right? So whoever the many is, he makes an agreement, but in the middle of the 7 years, he breaks his own agreement. And it says he breaks his own agreement and he stops sacrifice at the temple. So that's what he does. So we know there's a temple. We know that it occurs in the middle of the 7 years. And we know that begins what Jesus called the Great Tribulation. Those are the things we absolutely are very clear.
So you're saying that his covenant or his peace treaty is what allows the Jews to build the temple and start sacrificing?
Well, that part I don't know. I think so. I'm speculating that that's the case because of how hard it would be for them to build a temple. Right?
Right.
So one of two scenarios I could see play out. Either they build a temple beforehand, but the temple causes chaos, causes a war, and then the peace treaty is just the Antichrist stepping in saying, you know, come on, you guys, stop fighting, and creates a peace treaty and brings peace to the city, but then breaks his own treaty. Or the Jews want to build a temple, but they're not allowed to. And then the Antichrist comes in and says, I will allow you as part of this peace deal to build a temple. Either one of those. All we do know for certain is that when he breaks the covenant, the temple it exists and is being used because he stops sacrifice, which means sacrifice has been going on.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
Just seems like it would take more than 3 years to build a temple. I mean, it's pretty big, right?
Yeah, that's actually a very good point. You know, it would have taken 20, 30 years back in Old Testament era, but with modern building techniques, I don't know. I think
Possible.
they put it up pretty quick.
Yeah.
Year or two, maybe. Yeah. Especially remember, the temple is not very big. The
Right.
temple is not very big. It's the area surrounding the temple that's big, like all of the courtyards that are outside. And there's a courtyard for people who are Gentiles. There's a separate courtyard for women who are Jews. And then there's another courtyard around the temple building that is the courtyard for male Jews. So female Jews are not allowed to go into the courtyard, at least in the Old Testament and Jesus's time. The women couldn't enter into that courtyard in the center. That may change now. Who knows? They may change all that. But
Well, it's not going to matter because all the men are going to be dressed like women.
yeah. Maybe that's what it is. You won't be able to tell the difference. Yeah, that's very possible, actually. Okay, let me see if I can break this down for you. All right. So when we're talking about what happens during the 70th week, right? Once it started, you're going to see a lot of parts to this. Okay. We're going to see parts that lead up to the rapture. Then you're going to see the rapture. Okay. The rapture is going to occur after the middle point. After that abomination of desolation is the rapture. Then I'm going to do a sort of an interlude and describe what's known as the pre-wrath view of the rapture, which is the view I hold and I think is the most biblically accurate. Okay. Then we're going to talk about what happens after the rapture. That's going to be basically when the wrath of God comes. And then we're going to talk about the second coming of Jesus, which I would place later. Okay. But it's a difficult term. So we'll do a lot of clarification later on these terms. All right. So that's kind of what we'll be covering. It's written at the very top of, what page is that? 57. So you'll know what's coming. Okay. Let me just start with one, and that's the invasion of Israel. This is speculative on my part. When it occurs is definitely speculative. It could be that it occurs, before, and the peace treaty is to try and end it. It could be that it occurs after the beginning of the 7 years. We don't know when it occurs, but it definitely has to do with a time frame around either the beginning of the 7 years or into a year or two into the 7 years. But at some point, Israel is going to be invaded. The Bible's very clear about that. All right. So again, the timing is unclear. While not described specifically on the prophetic timeline, it seems clear that Israel will be invaded and overrun at some point in the future. These prophecies, are found in parallel passages that we've studied, the books of Ezekiel 38 and 39, which are sort of the future of Israel, and then Daniel chapters 7 through 12, or you might be better to say 9 through 12. 7 and 8 might be they're really vague. They probably refer to the Greek invasion of Israel, but after that it goes into a later invasion of Israel, and they sort of all meld together in Daniel. Okay. My guess would be that this invasion is led by that coalition that we talked about, those states that are conspiring against Israel, probably led by Russia or Turkey, possibly by Iran. But this is my guess about what's going to happen based on Ezekiel and based on the current goings on, the current politics of the area. Okay. It's not spelled out exactly. Where are we? Page 57. It's not spelled out exactly, when it's going to happen. It could be in progress when the Antichrist begins his 7-year covenant, or it could be a false treaty made by a powerful army on the verge of invasion. In other words, they want to invade, so they start this peace process and they go, hey, look over there. And the reality is it's not really a peace process. It's a distraction to in order to invade. We don't know, right? Could also be started by Israel, right? Nobody knows exactly when this invasion is going to occur. But the Bible, we're not going to go too in depth into it, but the Bible's very clear that Israel will be invaded probably by those countries that we've already discussed in Ezekiel chapter 38. All right. It talks about putting a hook in your mouth and pulling you in, and then you will invade the nation of Israel. So it's very clear that it's going to happen, and it's fairly clear who it's going to be led by. Either Russia, Turkey, any of those nations that are involved over there. Okay. Right. And then let's see where you are here. Okay. Let me I might stop here. The next thing you're going to see is top of page 58. Why did I say that? I don't know why I put that there. I think that might be a mistake. But again, we already know this is important, but it's the beginning of that 7-year covenant. I don't know why I did this. This is repetitive. I changed some things around when I reformatted this class, and I may have just put this in the wrong spot. We've already talked about all this. Let me go down to a couple fill-ins, and then we'll be done. I got to find it here. The nature of the covenant. Okay. Let me go down. No. There it is. A couple of things you can fill in. The nature of the covenant. It might have something to do with allowing sacrifice or offering. So again, maybe the temple exists, but there's fighting over it. So the peace treaty is to allow them to do offerings, right? Or it could be a ceasefire, like I said. This is really repetitive. Sorry about that. Or again, could be the allowance of the construction. So I got ahead of myself, and I'm not sure why I missed that. But we just aren't sure. All we know is that a temple will be built, and then the 7-year agreement is going to kick in at some point. Okay. So we'll start next time with the coming of the helper. And this is not the Antichrist. This is someone else who's going to come in and going to help the Antichrist. All right. So we can end there. Questions? Do you have questions?
Can you go back one more page?
Yeah. There.
Yes, thank you.
All right. Okay, so what do you think? Keep an eye on the temple. All right. So follow anything you see on the news if you're interested. Keep an eye on the temple, because that's a key thing that must happen, and it absolutely must happen before the middle of the 7 years. and probably before the beginning of the 7 years, or possibly that'll signal the beginning of the 7 years. One of those.
Are there any news outlets that are more accurate or more informative than others that we could look for that stuff?
Yeah, that's a good question. Let me look real quick. I should put that on the slide. I'll try to remember to do that. Let me go to my, I'm going to my browser real quick, because I got to remember some names. So I follow a lot of YouTube channels that cover this stuff. I'm trying to remember the name. Let's see, The Watchman, I think. Let's see. Yeah, The Watchman newscast. Let me do something real quick here. Yeah, it'll probably say it's a YouTube channel. It's called The Watchman with Eric Stackelbeck. I'll write that name down if I can here. Hold on. Oops. Let me do something. So YouTube page, The Watchman with Eric Stackelbeck. Okay, hold on. I'm going to write it on your screen so you can kind of see. Oops, darn it. Sorry.
It wouldn't be William and Mary, would it?
What? Oh,
William and Mary.
every time I wear this, somebody says, which one are you, William and Mary? And I say, I identify as both William and Mary. I'm a troublemaker. Sorry about that.
Yeah. People come to my office and they ask me where the bathroom is. And I said, either the first one on the left or the second one, you get to choose.
Okay, I'm going to write some names down as I find them. That's one, the Watchman. Can you see it still?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Let me see this one. Okay, so I'm going to give you this headline. But keep in mind, it's endtimeheadlines.org. Okay, keep in mind, these guys are kind of sensationalist, and they are pre-trib rapture people, which I'm not. But they have really good headlines, prophetic sort of headlines, you know. And then there's Haaretz, that's a Jewish newspaper. There's the Jerusalem Times. Al Jazeera. That's a there we go. Al Jazeera, that's a website. I think it's a website and a YouTube. Who else do I watch? Let's see. I gotta remember his name. Amir Sarfati. Amir Sarfati is a Jewish Christian, and he has
I've heard of him.
have you heard of him?
And The Watchmen. I watched that one too.
Okay. Amir Sarfati's got I don't know if you've ever heard of Telegram, but Telegram is a messaging app that's kind of new. It's kind of like what Facebook Messenger does and stuff like that, or even your regular texting app. But it's Amir Sarfati he'll send out like 10 a day, and he's a great source for all of the current goings on in the Middle East. I mean, he sends out news every day. In fact, he sends out so much that I really can't even keep up with him. I'll go on once a week and I've missed about 100, you know, because he's just that prolific. He's also a pre-tribber. Just warning you. He's also a pre-tribber. So be careful, because you'll notice that I'm not a pre-tribber. You'll also notice I don't like pre-trib theology. I'm bothered by it because I think it's dangerous. And as we go on, I think you'll understand more about.
You watch any of Jan Markell?
Not anymore, because she's really, I mean, she's kind of wrong a lot of the time. She says some stuff that's really not accurate. And she does
I
it a
think
lot.
I think she's had Amir Sarfati on her show, it seems. I
She
recall.
has.
Yeah.
She probably does a lot because he's popular.
I
Yeah,
know that Dalton Thomas puts out stuff on
Oh yeah.
in the Middle East.
Let me write him
Uh,
in here. FAI.
Yeah, exactly. FAI. They're really good. I don't know where he stands on Trib though. I haven't really.
He is a post-trib believer, I think. Or he
Yeah, I
might
wasn't
be a
quite
pre-wrath
sure.
believer. FAI, which is what is it? Frontier Alliance
Frontier
International.
Alliance International. Yeah.
And also, let me give you another one. Joel Richardson.
Yeah, he's part of FAI.
Yeah. He also has his own stuff on the side.
Yeah, he
Joel
does.
Richardson. So he's a good source. I used to follow him strictly, and I have, gosh, oh, I'm not there at work. I have, I think, every book he's ever written.
Oh yeah.
So
I
he's
know
good.
sometimes him and Dalton disagree with stuff. And Dalton's more with what's going on in the Gondo, how do you say it? Gondolo Heights? How do you say
Golan
it?
Heights.
Golan Heights, there you go. But I noticed that when I watch their teachings, because they tag team a lot, that they do have disagreements. And I like that because it gives you a chance to see both sides or different opinions.
Yeah, because a lot of times you'll get these websites or you'll find these YouTube channels, and it's echo chamber stuff. They won't listen to any other view. And that's really dangerous. It's really dangerous to just only listen to one theory and only entertain one theory, and then just shut out every other theory that comes along. I'll give you, I don't want to keep you too long, but I'll give you one thing that bothers me a lot about the pre-tribulation camp, right? And that's that when you go to pre-tribulation YouTube pages, 90+% of the time they will shut off all comments. So you cannot question anything they say. You can't challenge them. You can't ask for clarification. They'll present a video and they will not allow any discussion of the video. They'll just shut it off. They'll do it in websites. They'll do it in threads. They will not allow any other view than pre-trib to be discussed, which to me is very dangerous. Very dangerous.
I've actually seen that myself through my YouTube searches during my podcasts and vlogging stuff. I see it a lot.
Yeah. I mean, I understand they get contentious. People argue and they're, well, we don't want to argue, but get over it, because arguing is part of learning. So deal with it.
I was raised pre-trib, and I've been pre-trib my entire life,
right?
Until about a year and a half ago. My sister introduced me to FAI, and she said, I'm not telling you what to believe. I'm just asking you to open your mind and listen to different points of view. And the things that's being presented, it was almost like I was brainwashed to believe one thing. There was no questioning it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And you were mocked and ridiculed if you did, or your faith was questioned. Yeah,
exactly. Or you were told, well, even today, if I say to people, well, I'm not really following that camp. If you believe that, I would rather you at least prepare just in case you're wrong.
Yeah.
Right. If I'm gone, I'm happy. If you're wrong, you're living through stuff you didn't prepare.
Oh my gosh, Tammy, you're expressing exactly why I formed this class.
Exactly. Well, I think a lot of people, that's
exactly what I'm doing
for a lot of people.
Yeah. And people are starting to wake up. Clearly you understand my bias, so I'm not going to keep it hidden. I'm doing this because I believe we're close, and I believe that the pre-trib view is wrong, which means by definition we are going to go through difficulty if it's close, and we need to start preparing. So I'm trying to open people's eyes to the fact that it may be coming soon, and it may be extremely difficult. And scripture talks a lot about people falling away. And I could see it. I could see that, the 7 years starts and the tribulation hasn't occurred. All of a sudden pre-trib people are going, wait, what's going on? Am I saved or not? Or the difficulty that comes after the abomination begins. And people are going, wait, what's going on? Am I not saved?
Confusion.
Not ready. you know?
Right. And on top of all of that, if they start thinking, okay, so this stuff is happening and you're saying that I'm wrong. Well, I don't want to hear that. I'm just
Yeah.
going to close my ears off. I don't want to hear that. I'm
Right.
secure where I am. You're
Right.
telling me that I might not be. So I don't want to listen to you.
Right. Of course. It's
And that's-
offensive, you know?
Right. And I
It's-
think that falling away is not because they're trying to turn away from Jesus, it's because they don't want to hear anything other than what they've been fed their whole
Right.
life.
I would much rather the pre-trib view was true.
Me too. I don't
I
want
would much rather it was
that
true.
stuff.
It just isn't.
I
It
want,
is,
I
it
want
isn't,
my,
and we're gonna have to live
I
with it.
want my kids to get married and have babies
Yep.
and be a great grandma and to go to weddings. I want all that stuff to happen.
Right.
But we don't know when it's coming. So that could happen, right? It could be 50 years, but there's so much going on right now that you just can't be blind to it.
Right. You just, if you're willfully blind to it, then you've got issues going on.
Yeah.
And that's what I think when I see people not willing to even discuss it. It's just
Mhm.
willful blindness. I think it might even be part of what scripture refers to as a great delusion that comes on people in the end times. Because it's
Mhm.
just, it just isn't, it's
And the
so
tickling of
clearly
ears.
not the biblical view. It's
Mhm.
uncanny to me.
And it's the tickling of ears, right?
I think so.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
just,
So I
it's
think
much
you're
more
still
pleasant.
recording, right, Dave?
Yeah. Well, yeah, I'm still recording. Yes.
Yeah.
Let me stop that.